over the edge of going into an extended series in the book of Proverbs that will address the practical instruction that Proverbs gives to us. So, in one sense, it's going to be a bit of a stopping of the Old Testament survey and camping out in Proverbs for a number of weeks. So one of the things that I aim to do tonight is more in the spirit of a Old Testament theology explanation of Proverbs, and then next week we'll get into beginning some of the topics that Proverbs teaches us to fear the Lord in. When you read the first verse in Proverbs, you learn who is attributed in a human way to be the author of Proverbs. Kinsey. Verse 1. Proverbs 1. Benji. Solomon. We're also told that we should understand Solomon in relationship to someone else. David. All right, that this is Solomon, son of David. But then we're also told the office that he holds. What is the office that he holds, Benji? King of Israel. So we would be able, just from verse 1, which is an introduction not only to Proverbs chapter 1, but the whole book of Proverbs. This is telling us that we are to understand the book of Proverbs to be the Davidic son in his kingly office, now giving instructions, we will see, to his son. So that's, in one sense, when you think of these books that we've been looking at in the Old Testament, and we ask questions about authorship, we attribute the book of Proverbs to David's son, King Solomon, king of Israel, and their Proverbs. And then when you look at verses 2 through verse 6, this is a preface or an introduction to the whole book of Proverbs. This is telling us, one, what it is that we must do as readers of the book of Proverbs or hearers of the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. But it also tells us what is the form in which his instruction is going to come to us. So I'm going to read and I'm going to ask for two things. One, I'm going to ask for what are the verbs that we are commanded to employ in taking the Proverbs of Solomon, and two, what are the results of us rightly doing what we're commanded to do here with the Proverbs of Solomon. Verse 2 through verse 6, Proverbs 1, to know wisdom and discipline, to understand the sayings of understanding, to receive discipline that leads to insight, that leads to insight, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the youth knowledge and discretion. Let the wise man hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire guidance. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. So first question, in looking at this preface to the whole book of Proverbs, what is the reader's obligation? What must we do?
Discern.
All right. We're going to, the youth will, they're going to give, these proverbs are going to give discretion. Where do you see discern in the verbs there, Quinn?
Verse 2. To know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding.
Okay, so yours translate, yeah. So it is to understand, or yours is rendered to discern, and that is the sayings of understanding. That's the particular way in which this book is going to use literature, a particular kind of literature that comes from Solomon to be able to teach us. But what do we have to do? What do we have to do? We have to understand it. So, Luke, let me ask you this. Can you read the Proverbs? And Luke, I do believe that often in your family, Proverbs are read every day. There's 31 Proverbs. Conveniently, that fits into the 31 days of a month. Is it going to be profitable just to have them read to you and not to understand them? No. No. We have to understand the sayings of understanding. What's something else that we're commanded to do in this preface? Leah? Receive. We have to receive. Now, what is it that we are commanded to receive, Malia? Instruction. I'm reading from the Legacy Standard Bible, and you can translate this word instruction or discipline, which helps us immensely to understand something about discipline as well as instruction. And that is these two words, Kinsey, these two words, discipline, instruction, they're actually the same thing. If someone is receiving discipline, they're being instructed in that discipline. If someone is being instructed, there's an aspect of discipline that just comes with instruction. But what is the requirement to be able to profit from this discipline that leads to insight, righteousness, justice, and equity? What is required of the one who is being given this instruction or discipline?
Wisdom, discernment.
All right, look at verse 3. What's the verb? To receive. To receive discipline. So in the preface, when we use an analogy, we're going to see, not that we're going to do it tonight, but Proverbs is going to talk a lot about the fool who does not receive instruction. Just go ahead and jump down. Verse 7 in chapter 1, if you're going to take a single verse and say, this is the thesis or the proposition of the book of Proverbs, it is Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7. So in memorizing Proverbs 1:7, we have in kernel form the right understanding of what is the book of Proverbs doing for us? What is it aiming to achieve in us? And there we read the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. Ignorant fools, that's the LSB. Some translations like the ESV just says fools. Despise wisdom, and here's the same word, Kinsey, discipline. Or your translation may say instruction. Because discipline or instruction is given to people, does that mean they're going to profit from it? According to the preface of Proverbs. Does it mean just because someone gives you the Proverbs of Solomon, which will be instruction, does that mean you're going to profit from it? Kinsey, what is required for us, according to the preface of Proverbs, to profit from the Proverbs of Solomon? Benji, help your sister. What is required of us in the preface of Proverbs for us to profit from the Proverbs of Solomon? What is required of us? To receive, that's right, to receive discipline, not to be a fool who despises it. There's some other verbs in here. What are some of the other verbs in the preface? Giving to us at the forefront, I have an obligation now. There's a moral responsibility that we have as the readers of Proverbs that we need to focus on first. Look at verse 5. What must the wise man do?
Hear and increase learning.
Hear and increase learning. Now, this is really fun, and I'm just going to aim at some of the young people. We're missing the Horners. I'd include this in them. Uh, Benji, you may know, you may not know, but there there is increasing in young people this acceptance of socialism. Have you heard of socialism? Communism is a form of socialism, and an especially evil form. Like in New York City, they just elected uh, uh, a socialist who really is a communist. Obviously, that you don't get elected to the mayor of New York unless somebody actually thinks that socialism and communism in particular would be good. And one of the things that socialism believes, Benji, is that you need to distribute everything equally so that no one can actually have more than someone else. When you look at what is required in verse 5 of the wise man and what he receives if he does that, is that equally distributing learning? Or are some people going to be wiser than others? Some are going to be wiser than others. And why is the wise man going to increase in what he already has? Because he hears. He hears. Proverbs, these sayings of Solomon, the king, and he's directing them, we will see, especially at his son. That the way that wisdom works in the world is that it is going to be unequally distributed to the wise. So that there will be those who have it and there will be those who don't. And the reason that those have it and will increase in it is because of how they respond to discipline and instruction, these sayings of understanding. And you can look at the ones who do not have wisdom, who do not have knowledge, and you can know, why do they not have it? It's because how they responded to the same sayings. They despised instruction. Right? So the preface gives us this understanding. We have an obligation now as readers and hearers of the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. If we're going to gain wisdom, we must hear. Now, one of the things that's helpful, Quinn, you're doing a great job. We've been encouraged as a church. Luke, I want you to make sure you understand this. One of the things that you can do, if you just do this singular thing, and I'm pointing out Quinn as an example, Quinn has shown up and paid attention to every meeting I think our church has had since he came on that Wednesday when we didn't have Wednesday night and talked to Kevin for a while. If you just will hear, if you will just pay attention, then you will increase in wisdom if it's these Proverbs of Solomon that we are hearing. But if you don't hear, it doesn't matter how much someone may give to you, read to you these wise sayings, you will not increase in understanding. Right? You see it there? Black and white in the preface. But in verse 6, we're told how this is going to work. We are to understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. So, what kind of form is this instruction going to come to us as? These sayings, these poetic, pithy sayings that come from normal everyday life, that we will have incredibly earthy illustrations of the fool and of the wise man. And this is why I'm going to pause, because I personally need to gain wisdom. And so it will be beneficial for me just to stop and to go slowly through Proverbs right now. And that's one of the reasons I want to stop and take a break from going through the rest of the Old Testament and just let's learn a few things from Proverbs that is going to be very practical for our lives. But they're going to come as we are considering these proverbs, these enigmas, these riddles. So we then see Proverbs in verse 7 gives us the thesis, as we said, and that's it. We can always go back. It can be like a chorus, if you will. And one of the ways that you might be able to benefit from this is you can take some of these proverbs and you can memorize them. And you can use them as you go through everyday life. And here's one that will always apply. I say it this way. Children, this is just to my household, so you don't have to answer unless your last name is Thomas. I will say things like this. Don't be stupid. What's the follow-up? Showing how well my class is going. You remember Luke and Benji, every time, Tuesday, Thursday, with the Ben Staldonans, after we hear the proverb of the day, don't be stupid. After we listen to the proverb of the day, fear the Lord. Oh, all right. Don't be stupid, fear the Lord. Because let's look at verse 7. This is the thesis. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. So if you're going to, in that sense, cross the go line of knowledge, wisdom, understanding, it only happens if you fear Yahweh, the covenant God of Israel, the God of David and of Solomon, the God of Israel. If you and I do not fear Yahweh, then you cannot have knowledge. The starting point is fear of Yahweh. That is the beginning of knowledge. In one sense, we're going to see this. It is the key that unlocks wisdom for life. Fear of God is the key that unlocks wisdom for all of life. Fear of God is the key that unlocks wisdom for all of life. And the opposite is who, Luke? There's the one who fears Yahweh. And what does Proverbs 1:7, who's the opposite of the one who fears Yahweh? The fool. The fool. How does the fool respond to wisdom and instruction? He hates it. He despises it. He does not value it. He does not hear it. He doesn't listen to it. He doesn't ponder it. And that's what's going to unfold through the Proverbs of Solomon. We're going to see painted for us in these pithy statements from everyday life, the one who fears Yahweh and gains wisdom. And we are going to see in the same pithy Proverbs, we are going to see the fool who despises wisdom and instruction. Now, this helps us, and this is a little bit practical. We're going to then get into the order, make some observations, because Proverbs can be a little bit difficult. We have been seeing, like in a biblical theology, a development throughout the Old Testament that enables us to see that there is continuity between the book of Moses and the prophets, and even we're seeing continuity in the book that we call the writings. And that is there is this growing and increasingly clear promise and expectation for a coming Messiah. We know he's coming from the tribe of Judah. We know he's now coming from the line of David. We know that he's going to fulfill the Abrahamic covenant. He's going to fulfill the Davidic covenant. And in doing so, he's actually going to bring the new covenant. And in the benefits of this, he's going to turn the hearts of God's people to God such that they will all know him. And in that way, he's bringing a relationship in this covenant that is going to be in contrast with the relationship that Moses brought. And in so doing, he brings God's people into God's place, and God comes down and dwells with them in Jerusalem. We've seen the accented part of there is a return to an Eden like place from exile when this son of David comes. And when you read Proverbs, it can be a little difficult to think, like, this doesn't seem like that's the message. It's very easy to read the Proverbs. It's wonderful to be able to immediately get instruction by just reading sometimes just a single verse and meditating on that single verse, and it helps you that very day, sometimes that very hour. But many students of the Old Testament have thought, how does Proverbs fit into the larger message of the Old Testament? It seems like it's not interested in this eschatological work of this Davidic king and his kingdom. Well, I have been interested in that, and I too have thought Proverbs seems to be a little different, but I've been reading and using James Hamilton's book, which is going through the whole Bible and giving these summaries and connections of how the message of the Bible is singular and continuous, but at the same time develops. And he has said some things that are very helpful for me. Here is one. He writes, God is glorified in salvation through judgment. That's his summary of what the thread that goes throughout the whole Bible. God's glory in salvation through judgment. God's glory in salvation through judgment. And he writes, God is glorified in salvation through judgment, even in the mundane and average details of life. So that's how he says Proverbs fits into that singular, continuous message of the whole Bible. We have another sort of observation at a big level. You see in verse 1 of chapter 1, Solomon is the author. I want you to turn over chapter 10. Chapter 10, verse 1, there's very clear order and relationship too, and we're going to take a look at that tonight at the first 9 chapters of Solomon. But when you get to chapter 10, and then we're going to go all the way through chapter 22, verse 16. We're going to skip, we're not reading. But in verse 1 of chapter 10, what are we told again? The Proverbs of Solomon. This, in one sense, is marking out, this is another section within Proverbs. Chapter 1, starting in verse 8, all the way through chapter 9, verse 18. That's one section, one unit. And we'll see how there's an order to it that can be observed, as difficult as it might be for me to be able to see that. I need other scholars' eyes to be able to help me know the order. But we also are able to see when we get to verse 1 in chapter 10, we now again see the Proverbs of Solomon, indicating this is a new section. And this goes all the way through. I want you to turn over to chapter 22. Chapter 22. Look at verse. Missing it. 17. All right, we're going to read through this section here. And now we see, incline your ear and hear the words of the wise. Right? Does your translation say the sayings of the wise? Yours says the words of the wise. Right? It then is establishing again another section by marking out, here are the sayings of the wise. And that starts in verse 17 of chapter 22. And it continues through chapter 24. Chapter 24. So then in chapter 25, verse 1, what do we read again? chapter 25, verse 1.
These are the Proverbs of Solomon.
That's right. We're now told, but the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, transcribed. So again, we have a marker indicating this is another section. So we have one section, chapter 1, verse 8 through chapter 9, verse 18. Then we have another section, chapter 10, verse 1 through chapter 22, verse 19. Then we have another section which begins in chapter 25. And then you have another section that starts in Proverbs 30, and then another one in Proverbs 31. Both of those proverbs also mark out another author. Proverbs 30 are the words of Agur, son of Jakah. It's actually thought that might be referring to Solomon, but we'll get into it when we may get there. But in verse 31, we also have King Lemuel, which is maybe another way in which some have referred to Solomon. But we're able to see here, though it can be a little hard for us to see an order that goes over the entire 31 chapters of Proverbs, there is an order. This is not sort of a haphazardly organized book, though it may seem as if it lacks order to at least myself. It's not immediately clear for me, but it becomes clear it does have its own order, and there's even an organization within. This is pretty interesting. I didn't figure this out. I read someone. When you take the Proverbs of Solomon that start in chapter 10, verse 1, in that section which goes through chapter 22, verse 16, there are 375 lines. In Hebrew, just like in Greek, if you're going to do Roman numerals, you remember what Roman numerals are, right? Greek and Hebrew, the letters of the alphabet are also their numbers. Do you know that? So if you're going to count using numbers, what do you count using in Hebrew and Greek? Letters. If you take the Hebrew spelling for Solomon and you add it up, what number do you think you'll get? 375. This seems to indicate that there was very clear an order that was set out that composed the book or the Proverbs of Solomon. And so in that way, we're able to see that while maybe not immediately clear to us English readers, it is evident for us that Proverbs is ordered in a particular way so that we might have these sayings of Solomon, and by rightly receiving them and hearing them, that we might fear the Lord and gain a heart of wisdom. Proverbs communicate to us the great truths of the tradition of the Torah in surprising and memorable ways. In one sense, I think my sons would be able to give evidence like, my dad has an ability to be incredibly boring in the way that he talks. Your older brother, Bo, said once, listening to you, what is it, Malia? Listening to you is like a knife in the stomach, a sword in my side. All right. Proverbs is one of the most pleasurable ways that you might consider what is the way of wisdom and expose what is the way of folly. They're pithy, they're memorable, they're easy in one sense to sort of mentally consider. And this is the way the great truths of the Torah, that is God's law, God's instruction, were being passed on by the king to his son. Now, this is what we got to also see that does relate to the message of the whole Old Testament and how Proverbs does fit in. In 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 29 through 31, there we learn that Solomon was the wisest man on earth. he was given, we learned in chapter 3 of First Kings, verse 12, God gave to him divine wisdom. In that sense, wisdom that was in one sense specially endowed to him by God. This book is from that man. But we also are able to read on in Solomon's life when we consider his sins in relationship to women, as well as in relationship to idolatry and the failure of his own sons and the division of the nation and kingdom of Israel. We see an incredible discrepancy between the wise sayings of Solomon and the life of Solomon. Now, that creates, in one sense, a tension. And that tension is something that has been a part of the message of the whole Old Testament. At the end of Deuteronomy in chapter 33 and 34, we see that Moses is finished. Chapter 34 seems, I think it could be written by Moses. It seems on the face not to be written by Moses. But therein, there's an expectation that there's going to be another prophet that will come who is a prophet like Moses. It just says it in a negative way, that there has not arisen a prophet like Moses. But that saying is an expression of an anticipation of this Moses-like prophet. When we looked at the Davidic covenant being made, and God promises a son to David who will reign forever, which is consistent with Genesis 49, verse 10, where it's going to be from the tribe of Judah, that there is going to come one and the scepter will not pass from his hand. We have had this anticipation of a Davidic son who is going to rule Israel. And then because of the prophecy in Numbers 24, he's also going to rule this one from the tribe of Judah, from the line of David. He will rule over all nations, Moab being that key illustration nation of all the nations. That's the star that rises up from Judah. And is Solomon that son? Obviously, in part, he built the temple that God in the Davidic covenant said he would build, but his moral failures clearly show he is not the fulfillment of the Davidic covenant. So we've had this tension, right? This tension between the promise and it not being fulfilled in these subsequent sons of David. The book of Proverbs, in one sense, is this grand testimony. Solomon, even with his great wisdom given to us in these Proverbs, yet with his life indicates that as we read Proverbs, we know Solomon is not the fulfillment of that promise. I think that's another way that Proverbs can fit into the message of the Old Testament. Solomon's wisdom teaches us that fear of God results in a life that is pleasing to God's judgment, while Solomon's life is an illustration of failing to actually live that life. But in the consideration of Proverbs, I do want to show for you, and this will be, I'll probably give you a handout, but this will be a little bit boring. But do you remember us talking about chiasms? I gave illustrations, one from our country's history when John F. Kennedy said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." You see how that's a chiastic structure. He starts first with ask not what your country can do for you. So now he's thinking, he's saying you, but then he starts the next line with, but what you can do for your country. If you were to write that out, closest to the left-hand margin, you'd have country. And at the center, the hinge, if you have it like an arrow, at the point of the arrow, or the armpit, whatever you want to metaphor you want to use, you'd have you. Well, the first chapters of Proverbs is written in a similar fashion, a chiastic structure. I'm just going to blitz through you how this works so that you'll be able to appreciate, oh, I see that there's a larger order that is making points of emphasis. And that will help us to have some larger themes that are very clear in our mind before we get down into some of the particular instructions of Proverbs. In chapter 1, and you can look there, in verse 8 through 19, please notice, Luke, who does he address? Verse 8. Verse 8. My son, hear, my son, your father's discipline, and do not abandon your mother's instruction. Here we have a father's invitation to wisdom, but then we're going to go through this and look at verse 10, Benji. There's another invitation. Who also is making an invitation to the reader of Proverbs? Chapter 1, verse 10. My son, if sinners entice you. Yeah, who also is inviting one to listen to them? Sinners. So this is the way it's going to work in Proverbs. And the first section, chapter 1, verses 18 through 19, we have these two invitations. The father's invitation and the sinner's invitation, or we could say enticement. Now, the other end, if you remember, we're talking about an arrow, we're talking about a chiastic structure. So here, these two invitations of the father and sinners. And then let's drop down to the other end of this chiastic structure, and that comes in chapter 9. In chapter 9, there's 18 verses there. So flip over to chapter 9. This is the end of this opening unit. In chapter 9, in verse 1, who are we introduced to building a house? Wisdom. Wisdom. And notice, what does she do in verse 3?
Sends out her maidens, toss from rooftops, the heights of the city.
That's right. Whoever is simple, let him turn here. Here is Lady Wisdom's invitation to the simple to get knowledge. But there's another. Look at verse 13. Benji, who is making an invitation in verse 13? Yeah, Lady Folly or Madam Foolishness. So we end this first section of Proverbs, chapter 1, verse 8 through chapter 9, verse 19. We started with these two invitations, the father's invitation, the sinner's enticement. We end with these two women. They are, in that sense, wisdom and folly is personified. Lady Wisdom calls out, and so does Madam Folly. Then let's go back to chapter 1 in verses 20 through 33. We are first introduced in the reading of Proverbs to Lady Wisdom, and she's shouting in the streets, verse 20. She gives forth her voice in the square. And verse 22, she calls out, how long, simple ones, will you love simplicity, and scoffers delight in scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? Turn to my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit upon you. I will make my words known to you. So, and here we see Lady Wisdom cries publicly for the simple to turn to her. Now go back to chapter 8. So we're kind of narrowing in, if you will. We're looking at the two sides of this chiastic order as it's moving towards the center. In chapter 8, all verses in chapter 8, who is calling out in chapter 8? Wisdom. Wisdom. Does not wisdom call, and discernment give forth her voice? At the top of the heights upon the way where the pathway meets, she takes her stand beside the gates at the opening to the city, at the entrance of the doors. She makes a shout, to you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. O simple ones, understand prudence, and fools, understand a heart of wisdom. Listen, for I will speak noble things, and the opening of my lips will reveal upright things. We could go on. But you see, it's a repeat of what was said in less verses in chapter 1, verses 20 through 33. Go back to chapter 2. Now we see a father's warning of two groups: wicked men and a forbidden woman. Again, verse 1, my son, if you will receive my words and treasure my commandments within you, and make your ear pay attention to my wisdom, incline your heart to discernment. For if you call out for understanding and give your voice for discernment, if you seek her as silver and search for her as hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of Yahweh and find the knowledge of God. For Yahweh gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and discernment. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright, a shield to those who walk in integrity, to guard the path of justice, and he keeps the way of his holy ones. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good track. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will keep you, discernment will guard you, to deliver you from the evil way. And here it is, from the man who speaks perverse things, from those who forsake the paths of uprightness, to walk in ways of darkness, those who are glad to do evil. Now look at verse 16. He adds to the wicked man the strange woman. That's not strange in like, she likes to walk backwards. What the strange is in that she's not the normal one. There's a enticement to her being different, to her being foreign. But what does it describe her? From the foreign woman who flatters with her words, who forsakes the close companion of her youth, and forgets the covenant of her God. For her house sinks down to death, and her tracks descend to the dead. All who go to her will not return, and they will not reach the paths of life. So we have the Father warning against the wicked man, and through the immoral or the forbidden woman. And then if we go over to the other side, chapter 7, what do you think we're going to find?
My version, by the way, has strange woman.
Yeah, so does mine.
Oh, okay.
Which is a way to say.
I thought you said foreign.
Well, mine has strange and has foreign, which is a synonym. That's what she is. What did Solomon? What kind of wives did he take? Though he was warned not to. Foreign women, strange women. Well, they were enticing to him.
I do think it's just physical. I've often read that it was political.
On the basis of this proverb, I think it was not just political. Then in chapter 7, what do you think the warning is? It is like the first part. It is a father's warning. My son, keep my words and treasure my commandments within you. Keep my commandments and live. And my law is the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you're my sister, and call understanding your intimate friend, in order to keep you from what? Or whom? From the strange woman, from the foreign woman who flatters with her words. Same words again. And here we have in this, so you see how we're seeing the order is all I'm wanting us to see here. The content will take a little more of a deeper dive, but you see the order. Now, immediately, what does that help us to understand? Something about God in ordering these proverbs such that we have this chiastic structure. Chiastic structures repeat themselves. Because the thing that you say in the, again, a picture like an arrow or an armpit, right? Look here. All right, this is the point, all right, the armpit. You say the same thing here that you say here. You can't see me, all right? You say it here, you say it here. 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 And here's the hinge. They're the closest together, but you say them once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times. But what does that mean? How many times at least will you hear the same thing? Twice. It's repetition. So if God so inspired, and if Solomon, the wisest man on earth, who wrote these proverbs in this manner, such that this chiastic method is what we're commanded to meditate on the sayings of the wise, might we need to hear it more than once? It's written so that we must hear it more than once. So we see the father's warning of the wicked men and the forbidden woman in chapter 2. And now again in chapter 7, the father's warning, beware of the adulterous woman. We go back up to the other side, chapter 3, starting in verse 1 through chapter 4, verse 27. And there the father's command, you 3 in the back, this is for you. Not the Horner girls, I'd be calling them too. It is for them to hear their parents' teaching. Chapter 3, verse 1, all the way through chapter 4, verse 27, the father's command, listen to my instruction. Then when we go to the other side of this chiastic structure, this arrow, this armpit-like way of writing something, when we go to the other side, we will be able to see, what do you think? Some more father's instruction. But on the second one, this is chapter 5, verse 1 through chapter 6. In this case, the father's command is to be faithful in marriage. So, and this is where we're at. We're at the center of the chiastic order of the first 9 chapters. At the center, what we have is Solomon is saying to his son. We could say it this way: the king is saying to the future king. Or I think rightly need to say the king is saying to his future kings. You need to listen to your parents' instruction. You need to listen to your parents' instruction. You need to be faithful in your marriage. Now, there's some details to this. There's parental instruction that deals with how to relate to your neighbors. And then there's also the father's command of how to be faithful in marriage, one, by fleeing the forbidden woman and rightly enjoying your wife. He also gives warning. The father gives warning. You need to beware of these 3 things: security, putting up a security for your neighbor, slothfulness in your work ethic, and violence in your treatment of people. Or we'll just say it this way: security, slothfulness, violence. But if you're going to go ahead and if you're going to just observe the life of fools, I bet you can find those three. Security is just dealing with finances, money. Money, laziness, and violence. Anger without self-control. Go to prison and find out what's their problems. Talk to fools and find out how are they foolish. You're going to find it's going to relate to, we're going to see Proverbs, and we'll dig into some of these. Money, anger, work ethic. And we're going to see women, or sexual morality is also going to receive a lot. And then we're going to find words. Words. I want to give another big picture of what Proverbs does. And so here are three big points that arise from just thinking about the arrangement, the larger observation about how these non-chapters are arranged, is that one, we are able to learn sons must listen. That's Kinsey, not just sons, but children. But since this is the king writing to the future kings, sons must listen to their parents' warnings to be wise. Go back to chapter 1, verse 18, just so we can see it written in black and white. All right, those who do not walk in the way, that's verse 15. They are the one who they lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush their own lives. So are the paths of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. Death comes, in one sense, to the sons who do not listen to the instruction, verse 8, of their mother and the discipline of their father. Number two, we learn that we'll call them young men or boys, but it would apply to girls, though I think we have to admit that some of this is particular instruction to boys and men. I would even go so far as to say Proverbs is a book that is explicitly written to men, even explicitly written to boys. So I'd say to you two boys, God has a book that he wrote for you. It's for other people too, but it's explicitly in Scripture, hear my son. And here what we are able to see, look at chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 22. The wicked, they'll be cut off from the land, and the treacherous will be torn away from it. But in contrast to them, verse 1 of chapter 2, my son, if you will receive my words and treasure my commandments within you, then you will understand the fear of Yahweh and find the knowledge of God. So we have this contrast here. Young men are warned against the wicked men who do not fear God and will be destroyed. And then lastly, number 3, we find out that young men are warned against the lure of sexual immorality in a repeated fashion in these first 9 chapters of Proverbs. Chapter 16 chapter 2, verse 16. This is written to deliver you from the strange woman, from the foreign woman who flatters with her words. How are you going to be delivered from her? My son, if you will receive my words and treasure my commandments within you. You go over to chapter 5, verses 4 and 5. But her end is as bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold of Sheol. Lest she watch the path of life, her tracks are unstable. She does not know it. How do you avoid her? Well, look at verse 1 of chapter 5. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my discernment, that you may keep discretion and that your lips may guard knowledge. So Proverbs frames it this way, and this is where we're just sort of kind of link some things together, that it begins with fear of God. Chapter 1, verse 7. You must respond to these Proverbs by fearing God. You must care about God's judgment of your life. You must care about what pleases God and what angers God. You must fear Yahweh. And because of this fear of Yahweh, which is the beginning of wisdom, who will you listen to? Verse 8 of chapter 1. Your father and your mother. And therefore, because you fear God, you listen to your father and mother. You indeed, in that sense, you are hearing the Proverbs of Solomon, verse 23 of chapter 1. You'll gain wisdom. You'll gain wisdom. Now, here's another observation that Hamilton makes that helps us to put this in the context of the Old Testament. Hamilton makes the observation, and I can't remember, he quoted somebody else, that when you take a look at Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy has a section that seems to reflect the 10 Commandments in the orders of, I believe it's like from chapter 17 to 24. I'm not quite sure if I'm remembering that correctly. But there also is a reflection of the 10 Commandments in these 9 chapters of Proverbs. But if you just think about fearing Yahweh and listening to your parents so that you might have wisdom for life, are you able to see the 10 Commandments reflection in that? The first 4 commandments deal with whom? Yahweh. The last 6 commandments deal with whom? Your neighbor. Who's in the middle? What's, in that sense, who's the hinge that connects you with from Yahweh to neighbor in the 10 commandments? Your parents. Your parents. Proverbs, these first 9 chapters are set up in a way that reflects that order. So that if you fear God, you should listen to your parents' instructions so that you will gain wisdom for how it is that you should relate to your neighbor, both the fools and the wise. So there's more there. When you get into the next section, you'll be able to see that chapter 10 forward, there's an order to it, but it's not as, and at least in my opinion, as easy to see as these non-chapters can be. What I'm going to do for, I don't know how long, is we're going to spend time just gaining some wisdom from the book of Proverbs. So here will be the theme. In the same way that we have a summer Bible reading challenge, we're going to have a summer of gaining wisdom. We're going to take the book of Proverbs, the introduction, the preface, and we're going to hear. We're going to receive. So may we fear the Lord and gain wisdom. Or we can say it this way, if you understand what we mean and what we don't mean. Don't be stupid. Fear the Lord. All right? You can take a look. Proverbs 12, verse 1. So with that, you are dismissed. We'll come back for more practical instruction from the pithy sayings of the Proverbs of Solomon.